Karen Matthews thought one fake heart attack would stop Judge Judy's courtroom from holding her accountable, but she had no idea the judge already had the medical records, the fraud pattern, and the parking garage footage that would destroy her performance in front of everyone. Before watching this shocking courtroom case review, make sure you subscribe to the channel, comment below where you're watching from, and stay connected for more powerful justice stories like this. Now, let's begin the case and see how one staged medical emergency turned into a complete public exposure. The Judge Judy courtroom went completely silent as Karen Matthews suddenly grabbed her chest with both drama and desperation. Her voice trembled through the room like someone begging to be saved. "Your Honor, I can't breathe. My heart, something is wrong." It looked frightening for a second. The audience froze. Maria Santos looked worried. Even the air in the courtroom seemed to stop moving. But the truth was much darker than what Karen wanted everyone to believe. This was not a sudden medical emergency. This was a performance. It was fast, calculated, and perfectly timed to help Karen escape the $3. Susan judgment she was moments away from facing in front of millions of daytime television viewers. Karen believed that if she could create enough panic, enough guilt, and enough sympathy, the courtroom would stop focusing on the money she owed and start focusing on her supposed health crisis. But what happened next shocked everyone watching. Judge Judy did not rush to help her. She did not panic. She did not immediately call paramedics. Instead, she leaned back in her chair with that calm, knowing smile that has made dishonest people nervous for decades. It was the kind of smile that tells a liar the judge already knows more than they think. The kind of smile that makes fraudsters feel the trap closing around them. Because what Karen Matthews did not know was that Judge Judy had already discovered her secret. Inside the court files, there was evidence that could destroy Karen's entire act. There were medical records showing that this same fake heart attack routine had allegedly been used before. Not once, not twice, but multiple times to escape legal pressure and avoid consequences. There were insurance fraud records that showed a disturbing pattern. And most damaging of all, there was a video from only 30 minutes before the hearing that would expose Karen as one of the most shameless frauds ever to walk into Judge Judy's courtroom. This was not simply another entitled woman trying to avoid paying a bill. This was a serial manipulator who had allegedly turned fake medical emergencies into a weapon. For years, Karen had used staged health scares to pressure hardworking people, frighten business owners, influence insurance claims, and avoid responsibility when she owed money. She had fooled doctors. She had manipulated insurance companies. She had made honest people feel guilty for demanding what they had earned. But on this day, she was about to learn that Judge Judy had been investigating her long before she ever stepped inside the courtroom. The trap had already been set. The evidence had already been gathered, and Karen Matthews was about to face the most humiliating exposure of her life. This case was not going to be a simple dispute over unpaid wages. It was about to become a full courtroom takedown, showing America what happens when a professional manipulator finally meets someone who is always several steps ahead. Karen Matthews had spent more than 10 years perfecting the art of appearing like the victim, and she was very good at it. This was not a confused woman having one emotional breakdown. This was not a desperate housewife caught on a bad day. Karen was a calculated predator who had turned fake illness into a strategy. At 47 years old, she had allegedly built an entire life of deception from her suburban Phoenix home. Her medicine cabinet was filled with prescription bottles that supported the image she wanted people to believe. She owned medical bracelets for conditions she did not actually suffer from. She had practiced her expressions, her breathing, and her moments of weakness so carefully that her performances could have made trained actors jealous. Her specialty was the cardiac episode, not a real one. A carefully timed one. Karen had studied heart attack symptoms online. She had practiced labored breathing in the mirror. She had learned when to clutch her chest, when to make her voice shake, and when to recover just enough to avoid serious medical intervention. She knew how long to stay in distress before people became too suspicious. She knew how to make people afraid of pushing her too hard. It was manipulation turned into an art form. And over the years, it had allegedly helped her make and avoid paying hundreds of thousands of dollars. Her scheme was simple, but extremely effective. Karen would target small businesses, independent contractors, cleaners, landscapers, handymen, dog walkers, and service workers who did not have enough money to fight long legal battles. She would hire them for legitimate work. She would praise them during the job. She would act friendly, satisfied, and grateful. Then the moment payment became due, everything changed. Suddenly, there were problems. Suddenly, the work was poor. Suddenly, something was broken. Suddenly, something was missing. Karen would begin with complaints, then move to threats, then lawsuits, and finally, if the pressure continued, she would collapse into one of her dramatic medical episodes. Her strategy relied on one emotional question: who wants to be blamed for giving someone a heart attack over money? That was how Karen won. She made decent people feel cruel for asking to be paid, but her fraud went far beyond unpaid bills. Karen had allegedly filed 17 separate insurance claims connected to stress-related cardiac episodes. She collected disability payments while still posting vacation photos on social media. She had sued 3 different employers, claiming workplace stress had caused serious heart problems. Each time, the companies decided it was easier and cheaper to settle than fight a long, uncomfortable case. She had even convinced 2 churches to raise money for her supposed medical expenses. People prayed for her recovery. Congregations donated money, and Karen allegedly pocketed the funds while continuing to perform the same fragile victim act. Her victims were almost always the same kind of people: hardworking, financially vulnerable, too busy to fight, too decent to question someone claiming to be medically fragile. Maria Santos, her former housekeeper, was only the latest person in a long line of people Karen had allegedly tried to destroy. Before Maria, there was James, a handyman who renovated Karen's bathroom and was then accused of terrible work when it was time for Karen to pay. There was Rebecca, the dog walker who cared for Karen's pets for months before Karen refused to pay the final invoice. There was David, the landscaper who transformed Karen's backyard, only to watch Karen fake a panic attack when he asked for the money she owed him. Each victim described the same pattern. At first, Karen loved the work. She gave compliments. She praised their professionalism. She acted happy with the results. Then the payment deadline arrived, and suddenly everything was wrong. Karen would invent complaints, demand refunds, threaten court, and if those tactics failed, she would collapse dramatically and claim the stress was damaging her heart. The pattern was so consistent, it almost seemed mechanical. But it worked because Karen understood human psychology. She knew that good people hesitate when someone appears sick. She knew that workers with families cannot risk being accused of causing someone's medical emergency. She knew many people would rather walk away from money than carry the guilt of thinking they had harmed someone. Karen was not only stealing money, she was weaponizing empathy. What made her even more dangerous was the way she researched people before targeting them. Karen checked social media pages, business reviews, and financial situations. She looked for people who were struggling, people who could not afford lawyers, and people who had families depending on them. She wanted victims who would be easier to pressure, people who needed payment but also feared being dragged through legal chaos, people who could be manipulated into believing silence was safer than justice. In Phoenix, small business owners had started whispering about Karen Matthews. Some had heard her name, some had heard warnings, but whispers do not hold up in court. Karen was careful. She changed neighborhoods. She changed the type of workers she targeted. She adjusted her stories just enough to keep each case looking separate. By the time victims began connecting the dots, Karen had usually already moved on to someone new. But Karen's confidence made her careless, and her greed made her reckless. When she hired Maria Santos, she made the one mistake that would eventually destroy her. She targeted a woman who would not back down. Maria was a single mother working 3 jobs to support her disabled son. She could not afford to lose $3,000. That money was not extra income. It was rent, it was food, it was medicine, it was survival. Maria had cleaned Karen's home faithfully. She had done the work. She had followed instructions. And when Karen tried to refuse payment, Maria refused to disappear like the others. But Maria had also done something none of Karen's previous victims had done carefully enough. She documented everything from the beginning. She kept messages. She recorded conversations. She photographed her work. She wrote down dates, times, tasks, and every important interaction. Karen did not know it, but while she was preparing another performance, Maria was building a wall of evidence. And when Karen tried to use her usual routine, Maria did not just have proof of her own work. She had enough evidence to expose the entire pattern. When Maria's case landed on Judge Judy's docket, it started an investigation that would unravel Karen Matthews' alleged fraud history and set up one of the most satisfying courtroom moments ever captured on television. Judge Judy-style had seen every kind of con artist walk into her courtroom. She had heard fake sob stories. She had watched people twist timelines, invent excuses, blame victims, and pretend confusion when the facts turned against them. She had seen people cry when they were cornered, rage when they were exposed, and perform innocence when the evidence clearly proved otherwise. But Karen Matthews was different. Karen was not just trying to lie her way through one small case. She represented something larger. A person who had allegedly built an entire system around manipulation, fake illness, and emotional pressure. She was not simply avoiding one $3,000 payment. She appeared to have spent years using the same kind of performance to escape responsibility again and again. And that made this case personal for Judge Judy, not emotional. Personal in the sense that Judge Judy had spent her career exposing exactly this kind of behavior. What the audience did not know was that Judge Judy's team had been investigating Karen for weeks before she ever stepped foot inside that courtroom. To the viewers, it may have looked like a normal small claims case. A housekeeper wanted unpaid wages. A homeowner denied owing the money. A judge would listen to both sides and make a decision. But behind the scenes, this was not a regular 22-minute television hearing. This was a setup for accountability. The investigation began the moment Maria Santos's case reached Judge Judy's desk. At first glance, it looked simple. Maria claimed she had worked for Karen and had not been paid. Karen responded with a counterclaim, accusing Maria of damage, theft, poor work, and emotional distress. But something about Karen's counterclaim felt wrong. It was too detailed in places where real victims are usually uncertain. Too convenient in places where the timing mattered. Too perfectly shaped to make Karen look helpless and Maria look dangerous. Judge Judy's producer, Amy, flagged the case because Karen's story did not feel like an ordinary complaint. It felt rehearsed. It felt like a familiar script. When Amy ran Karen Matthews' name through the show's database, she found something that immediately changed the direction of the case. Karen had tried to appear on Judge Judy's show before. Twice. Both times she had applied as the plaintiff. Both times she had claimed that someone else's negligence had harmed her. Both times her story carried the same emotional structure. Karen was fragile, Karen had suffered, Karen had been wronged, and someone else needed to pay. That was when Judge Judy personally requested the file. Because Judge Judy does not simply walk into her courtroom and guess. Her sharp questions may sound spontaneous, but they are backed by preparation. Her team reviews documents, checks claims, compares timelines, and searches for contradictions. And when something looks like fraud, they dig deeper. Karen's name opened a trail. That trail led to insurance claims, previous lawsuits, medical complaints, social media posts that did not match the injuries she claimed, business disputes with people who had all described similar behavior. Judge Judy's team discovered that Karen had repeatedly targeted service workers and small business owners. The stories varied slightly, but the structure stayed the same. Karen hired someone, Karen praised the work, Karen delayed or refused payment. Karen accused the worker of damage or dishonesty, and when pressure increased, Karen suddenly became medically distressed. The pattern was too clear to ignore. Investigators even found security footage from a grocery store parking lot showing Karen doing energetic exercises only hours after she had filed a disability-related claim for a back injury. It was the kind of evidence that made her entire history look less like coincidence and more like strategy. But the strongest piece of information came from a source Karen could never have expected, Dr. Patricia Chen. Dr. Chen was a medical consultant connected to the Judge Judy show, and when she saw Karen Matthews' name, she immediately remembered it. 3 years earlier, Dr. Chen had been working at Phoenix General Hospital when Karen was brought in by ambulance during a legal deposition. Karen had reportedly suffered what looked like a heart attack right when the deposition became uncomfortable. Dr. Chen examined her, but the medical results did not match the performance. There were no signs of a serious cardiac episode. No clear medical emergency. No evidence that supported the dramatic symptoms Karen had presented. And the most suspicious part was how quickly Karen seemed to recover once she believed the most important people were no longer watching. Dr. Chen documented the incident at the time because she suspected fraud, but suspicion alone was not enough. Now, years later, Karen's name had appeared again. And this time, the pattern was larger. Dr. Chen contacted Judge Judy and provided the medical records and her professional concerns. That was the moment Judge Judy realized Maria Santos's case was not just about unpaid wages. It was an opportunity to expose a serial fraud artist, someone who had allegedly spent years courties harming people who could not afford to fight back. Judge Judy made a deliberate decision. She would not warn Karen. She would not reveal too much too early. She would let Karen believe she was still controlling the room because Judge Judy understood something important about manipulators. If you confront them too soon, they deny, adjust, and hide. But if you let them continue performing, they often expose themselves better than anyone else could. So the trap was prepared with precision. Judge Judy's team collected backup records for Karen's previous disputes. They organized the insurance documents. They prepared the earlier medical information. They placed Dr. Patricia Chen on standby with mobile medical equipment. They even had people positioned to observe Karen's behavior before and after the hearing, because Judge Judy suspected the performance might begin before the cameras were officially focused on her. And that suspicion paid off. The most damaging evidence came from the courthouse parking garage. Only 30 minutes before the hearing began, security footage reportedly captured Karen sitting inside her car. She was not having chest pain. She was not struggling to breathe. She was not showing any sign of medical distress. She was practicing. The footage showed her rehearsing the exact routine she would later perform in court. The hand pressed to the chest, the dramatic breathing, the forward slump, the strained facial expression. At one point, she appeared to use her phone like a timer, as if she were measuring how long the episode should last before it looked convincing. For Judge Judy, that video changed everything. Because a true medical emergency is not rehearsed. A heart attack is not practiced in a parking garage. A genuine crisis does not come with timing, staging, and preparation. Karen Matthews thought she was preparing to fool the courtroom. Instead, She had created the very evidence that would destroy her. By the time she walked through the courtroom doors, Judge Judy already had almost everything she needed. The files were ready, the medical consultant was ready, the footage was ready, Maria's documentation was ready, and Karen, completely unaware of how much the judge already knew, walked in believing she was still the smartest person in the room. She had placed her fake medical bracelet where it could be seen. Her breathing was already slightly heavier than normal. As if she wanted everyone to notice how fragile she was. Her hands stayed close to her chest, prepared for the moment when the case turned against her. But Judge Judy was watching every movement, the fake concern, the strategic weakness, the careful setup. The performance before the performance, Karen thought she was playing chess. Judge Judy had already moved every piece on the board. Maria Santos presented her case first, and she did it with the quiet dignity of someone who did not need drama to prove the truth. She explained that she had worked for Karen for 2 years, cleaning her 4,000-square-foot house twice every week. She had been on time. She had been professional. She had followed instructions. She had done the work properly. And for 23 months, Karen had paid her without serious complaint. Then came the final month, the month Maria was owed $3,000. Suddenly, the payment stopped. Maria did not come into court with empty claims. She brought text messages showing Karen's compliments. She brought photos showing the house clean and well cared for after her visits. She brought bank records showing consistent payments for nearly 2 years. She brought a timeline that made Karen's sudden accusations look suspicious before Karen even opened her mouth. Judge Judy listened closely. Her questions sounded normal, but every one of them had a purpose. She was building the foundation. She was letting Maria's record stand clearly before giving Karen room to contradict herself. Ms. Santos, Judge Judy asked, during the 2 years you worked for Ms. Matthews, did she ever make complaints about your work? Maria's answer was calm, simple, and powerful. No, Your Honor. She used to tell her friends I was the best housekeeper she had ever had. She even asked me to stay extra hours for her dinner parties. That answer hit the courtroom quietly, but deeply, because it made Karen's upcoming story feel even less believable. Then Karen got her turn, and the performance began almost immediately. Her voice trembled. Her face tightened. She described herself as the victim of Maria's negligence and dishonesty. She claimed Maria had broken her grandmother's china, damaged hardwood floors, and stolen jewelry from the house. The accusations were serious, but they were unsupported. Judge Judy had been doing this for decades, and she could sense when a story was built on emotion instead of evidence. She leaned forward slightly and asked Karen the question that began narrowing the walls around her. Ms. Matthews, you are telling me that Ms. Santos worked perfectly for 23 months, and then in month 24 she suddenly became destructive and dishonest. Karen tried to sound confident. Yes, Your Honor, people change. I think she was angry because I could not give her a raise. The answer sounded weak even as she said it. It was too convenient, too clean, too obviously shaped to explain away the timing. Judge Judy reached for a folder, and Karen's face changed just enough for the audience to notice. Ms. Matthews, Judge Judy said, I have here an insurance claim from 2019 where you accused a previous housekeeper of almost the exact same things. Broken china, damaged floors, missing jewelry. Same story. Different worker. That is quite a coincidence, isn't it? Karen went pale, but she did not stop. That was different, she said. Some people just do not respect other people's property. Judge Judy continued. Step by step, she showed photos Maria had taken of the house, each one showing the rooms in clean and proper condition. She referenced text messages where Karen praised Maria's work only days before firing her. She brought up a recording where Karen told a friend how lucky she was to have found such an honest and hardworking housekeeper. Then Judge Judy looked at Karen again. Your counterclaim asks for $5,000 in damages, but you have no photos of the alleged destruction, no proof of theft, no repair bills, and no clear timeline for when these incidents supposedly happened. Are you sure you want to continue this charade? At that moment, Karen's desperation became visible to everyone. The room could feel it. Judge Judy was not buying the victim act. Maria's evidence was too strong. Karen's story was falling apart, and the audience was clearly beginning to understand what kind of person they were watching. Karen Matthews knew she was losing control, and when Karen lost control, she reached for the one trick that had saved her so many times before. It was time for the fake heart attack. The same performance that had saved Karen Matthews so many times before was now about to become her final mistake. She had reached the point where the facts were closing in from every side. Maria's evidence was strong. Judge Judy's questions were cutting through every excuse. The audience was no longer seeing Karen as a victim. They were seeing a woman whose story was collapsing in real time. Karen understood that her normal defense was not working. The trembling voice had not worked. The accusations had not worked. The counterclaim had not worked. moved. Even the emotional tone she used to make herself sound fragile had failed to move Judge Judy. So Karen reached for the one strategy she believed could still save her. She lifted her hand toward her chest like an actress hitting the exact mark she had rehearsed. Her breathing suddenly changed. It became loud, uneven, and dramatic. Her shoulders tightened. Her body leaned forward as if she were fighting to stay conscious. "Your Honor, I can't breathe," Karen gasped. "Something is wrong with my heart. I think I'm having, oh God." Then she slumped forward in her chair. One hand gripping the table and the other pressed firmly against her chest. The courtroom froze. The audience gasped. Maria Santos, despite everything Karen had done to her, looked genuinely concerned. That was the kind of person Maria was. Even after being cheated out of money. Even after being accused. Even after watching Karen try to destroy her character, she still reacted like a human being when she thought someone might be in danger. And that was exactly what Karen always counted on. She counted on decency. She counted on guilt. She counted on good people becoming too afraid to keep demanding accountability when someone appeared to be suffering. This moment had saved Karen again and again. It had stopped arguments, delayed proceedings, pressured victims to back off, made people feel cruel for continuing to ask questions. It had turned Karen from the person responsible into the person everyone felt forced to protect. But this time, something was different. Judge Judy did not move. She did not jump from the bench. She did not panic. She did not let the courtroom become controlled by Karen's performance. Instead, she leaned back in her chair and watched Karen with a smile so calm and cold that the entire room could feel the shift. "Matthews," Judge Judy said, "that is quite a performance, but I have seen better acting in community theater." The words hit Karen like a slap. For one brief second, her act cracked. Her eyes opened a little too quickly. Her breathing became normal for half a moment. Her expression flashed with anger before she forced herself back into the role, but she was already committed. She kept moaning softly. She fanned herself with papers. She continued clutching her chest as if she believed the courtroom would eventually surrender to the drama. Judge Judy did not surrender. She turned calmly to the bailiff. "Please call Dr. Patricia Chen," she said. "Tell her we have a medical situation that requires immediate attention." Karen's eyes snapped open. That was not part of the plan. Usually, Karen controlled the recovery. She would struggle for a few minutes, accept water, maybe ask for a break, then slowly regain herself once the pressure had passed. People would feel uncomfortable continuing. The case would lose momentum. The victim would feel guilty. The room would soften. But this time, Judge Judy had called a doctor. Not after the hearing, not later, right there. In the courtroom, Dr. Patricia Chen entered carrying a medical bag and a portable EKG machine, and Karen's performance immediately started to weaken. Her breathing, which had been loud and dramatic seconds earlier, became quieter. Her color improved. The helpless moaning faded into nervous movement. She looked at the medical equipment, then at Judge Judy, then at the audience. As if searching for a way to escape the scene she had created, Judge Judy's voice remained firm. "Dr. Chen, Ms. Matthews appears to be having a cardiac episode. Please examine her immediately." Dr. Chen approached Karen professionally. She did not accuse her. She did not argue with her. She simply treated the situation like a real medical complaint, and that was what made Karen nervous, because a fake emergency can frighten people. It struggles under real examination. Dr. Chen attached the EKG monitors to Karen's chest. She checked her pulse. She measured her blood pressure. She examined her oxygen levels and pupils. She asked direct medical questions while Karen's symptoms seemed to disappear piece by piece. The heavy breathing faded. The chest clutching loosened. The weakness in her voice became irritation. The dramatic collapse turned into stiff silence. Everyone in the courtroom could see it happening. Karen's act was not being shouted down. It was being medically dismantled. After completing the examination, Dr. Chen turned toward Judge Judy and delivered the result that destroyed the entire performance. "Your Honor, her vital signs are completely normal. Heart rate is 72. Blood pressure is a 115/75. Oxygen levels are perfect. There is no indication of cardiac distress whatsoever." The courtroom erupted. People whispered, gasped, and reacted all at once. Maria looked stunned, not because she had believed Karen, but because she was finally watching the manipulation being exposed in a way nobody could deny. But Judge Judy was not finished. Karen's fake emergency had been exposed by the doctor, but Judge Judy still had the proof that would show it was not just fake. It was planned. Judge Judy looked toward the bailiff. "Please show Ms. Matthews the security footage from parking garage camera 3, recorded today at 1:47 p.m. Karen's face changed instantly. Before the screen even turned on, she knew. The courtroom monitor lit up, and the footage appeared clearly. There was Karen Matthews sitting in her car in the courthouse parking garage. She was not sick. She was not panicking. She was not struggling to breathe. She was practicing. The video showed her rehearsing the same routine she had just performed in court. The hand flying to the chest, the labored breathing, the dramatic forward slump, the expression of panic. At one point, she even appeared to time herself with her phone, as if testing how long the performance should last. The room went silent again. But this silence was different. It was not fear. It was recognition. Everyone understood what they were watching. Karen had not suffered a sudden heart problem. She had rehearsed a fake one before entering the courtroom. Her face shifted from pale to bright red. The fragile victim disappeared. The weak voice disappeared. The helpless expression disappeared. What replaced it was rage and humiliation. "This is a setup," Karen snapped. "You can't use that footage. I want a real trial." But it was too late. The act had been exposed. The doctor had confirmed there was no cardiac distress. The security footage had shown the rehearsal. And Karen Matthews' most reliable weapon had just destroyed her credibility in front of everyone. Judge Judy let the moment breathe. She did not rush. She did not need to. The evidence was doing all the work. Then she looked back at Karen with the controlled authority of someone who had watched every lie finally collapse. "Ms. Matthews," Judge Judy said, "what we just witnessed was not a medical emergency. It was a performance. And unfortunately for you, it was a performance you rehearsed before you ever walked into this courtroom." Karen tried to speak again, but Judge Judy cut her off immediately. "No, you are finished talking." The courtroom became silent. This time, everyone knew the verdict was coming. Judge Judy began laying out the facts with surgical precision. Maria Santos had worked for Karen for nearly 2 years. Karen had praised Maria's work repeatedly. Karen had paid her consistently for 23 months. The complaints only appeared when the final $3,000 was due. Karen had no reliable proof of damage, theft, or negligence. Her counterclaim mirrored accusations she had made against previous workers, and when the evidence turned against her, she staged a fake medical emergency in court. Each point closed another door. Karen sat there with anger on her face, but there was nowhere left to go. Maria sat quietly, her hands folded, trying to hold back the emotion of finally being believed. For her, this was not a viral courtroom moment. This was her life. That $3,000 represented food, rent, medicine, and care for her disabled son. It represented hours of honest work that Karen had tried to erase with lies. Judge Judy understood that, and that was why her response was so firm. This case was not just about one unpaid bill. It was about a person who had learned to use fear and sympathy to harm people who could not afford to fight back. Karen had counted on Maria being too tired to continue. She had counted on the court being too cautious to challenge a medical emergency. She had counted on the audience feeling sorry for her, but instead her own performance became the final proof against her. Judge Judy looked directly at Karen. The act was over, the evidence had spoken, and now it was time for consequences. With Karen's fraud fully exposed in front of the courtroom, Judge Judy delivered the verdict with the kind of force that made it clear there was no more room for excuses. Karen Matthews was no longer clutching her chest. She was no longer gasping for air. She was no longer pretending to be weak, frightened, or medically fragile. The moment the doctor examined her and the parking garage footage appeared on the screen, the performance had collapsed completely. Now she was sitting there in stunned silence, humiliated, angry, and exposed. Judge Judy looked at her with the same calm expression she had carried throughout the entire case. She did not need to yell. She did not need to embarrass Karen further with emotion. The evidence had already done that. Then Judge Judy spoke. "Ms. Matthews, in my years on the bench, I have seen dishonest people, manipulative people, and people who believe drama can replace facts. But what you attempted in this courtroom today is one of the most calculated and disgraceful displays of fraud I have ever seen." Karen opened her mouth, trying to interrupt, but Judge Judy cut her off immediately. "No, you are done talking." The courtroom went completely quiet. Maria Santos sat still, trying to process what was happening. For months, she had only wanted to be paid for work she had honestly completed. She had been accused, pressured, and treated like the problem, even though she was the one who had been wronged. Now, for the first time, someone in authority was saying clearly what Maria had known all along. Karen had not been the victim. Karen had been the manipulator. Judge Judy continued, her voice sharp and controlled. "You hired Ms. Santos. You accepted her work. You praised her work for nearly 2 years. You paid her consistently for 23 months. Then, when the final $3,000 became due, you suddenly claimed she was careless, destructive, and dishonest. That is not a coincidence, Ms. Matthews. That is a pattern." Karen's face tightened, but she had nothing strong left to say. Judge Judy had the messages. She had the photos. She had Maria's payment records. She had the old insurance claims. She had Dr. Chen's medical findings. She had the parking garage footage. Every piece of evidence pointed in the same direction. Maria had worked. Karen had refused to pay. And when Karen realized the truth was catching up to her, she tried to turn the courtroom into another stage for her fake medical crisis. Judge Judy turned toward Maria. Judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $3,000. For a moment, Maria looked down and blinked quickly, trying to hold back emotion. That amount was not just a number to her. It was money she had earned through long hours, physical work, and honest service. It was rent, food, bills. Support for her disabled son. It was the money Karen had tried to take from her using lies and intimidation, but Judge Judy was not finished. She looked back at Karen, and because of your false accusations, your staged medical performance, And the emotional distress you caused Ms. Santos by attempting to humiliate and discredit her in this courtroom, I am awarding her an additional $2,000. The courtroom erupted in applause. The reaction was immediate and powerful. People were not simply clapping because Maria had won money. They were clapping because a person who had spent years manipulating others had finally been stopped in a way everyone could see. Karen sat frozen. The fake heart attack that had allegedly saved her from consequences for years had now become the thing that destroyed her reputation in front of millions. But Judge Judy still had one more blow to deliver. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes fixed on Karen. Furthermore, Ms. Matthews, I am forwarding the evidence in this case, including your insurance history, your pattern of false medical claims, the prior complaints, Dr. Chen's findings, and today's courtroom performance. To the Phoenix District Attorney's Office, the Arizona State Insurance Commissioner, and the appropriate fraud investigation authorities. Karen's expression changed instantly. This was no longer just a television judgment. This was no longer only about paying Maria. This was now about the possibility of real legal consequences. The records could be reviewed. Previous claims could be reopened. Past victims could come forward. Insurance companies could investigate whether Karen had used the same routine to collect money she never deserved. Judge Judy's final warning landed hard. Your days of victimizing hardworking people are over. Karen tried one last time to protect herself. This whole thing was a setup, she snapped. You cannot prove I was faking anything. I want a real court. I want a real trial. But her words had no power left. The audience had seen the medical exam. They had heard Dr. Chen say her vital signs were normal. They had watched footage of Karen practicing the exact same performance in her car before the hearing, and they had seen how quickly her fragile victim act turned into anger the moment she realized she had been caught. Her meltdown only confirmed what everyone already understood. A serial manipulator had finally been exposed. Maria Santos, on the other hand, remained calm. She did not celebrate loudly. She did not insult Karen. She did not try to make the moment bigger than it already was. She simply looked at Judge Judy and said, "Thank you, Your Honor. I just wanted to be paid for my honest work." That simple sentence captured the entire case. Maria had not come for revenge. She had come for fairness. She had not staged a performance. She had brought proof. She had not tried to destroy anyone. She only wanted the money she had earned. The contrast between the two women could not have been clearer. On one side was genuine integrity, quiet dignity, and honest labor. On the other side was entitlement, deception, and a desperate attempt to use fake suffering as a shield against accountability. Within minutes of the verdict, the case exploded online. Clips of Karen's fake heart attack spread across social media almost immediately. Viewers replayed the moment she clutched her chest, then compared it with the parking garage footage, showing her rehearsing the same routine before court. The internet turned the entire exposure into one of the most talked about courtroom moments of the day. The hashtag about Karen's fake heart attack began trending quickly. Thousands of people commented on the footage, calling her performance ridiculous, shameless, and impossible to defend. TikTok videos broke down every part of the scam, from her hand placement to the sudden change in her breathing when Dr. Chen entered the courtroom. The parking garage footage became the center of the public reaction. People could not believe Karen had actually practiced the fake medical episode in her car before walking into court. The chest clutching, the dramatic breathing, the timing with her phone. Everything about it looked like an actor rehearsing a scene. Except this was not theater. This was an attempt to avoid paying an honest worker. Local news stations picked up the story within hours. Reports began warning Phoenix residents about Karen Matthews and her alleged pattern of scams. People who had worked for her in the past began recognizing the routine. Some of them had been too embarrassed or exhausted to speak before, but after seeing Maria win, they started coming forward. Several previous victims told similar stories. A worker hired for a job praised during the work. A sudden complaint when payment was due, an accusation, a medical episode, a threat, then silence. For years, each victim thought their experience was separate. Karen had relied on that isolation. She believed that if each person walked away quietly, no one would ever see the full picture. But Judge Judy's courtroom changed that. The case connected the dots. It showed that Karen's actions were not random. They were not misunderstandings. They were not isolated disagreements between a homeowner and service workers. They were part of a pattern. And once a pattern becomes visible, it becomes much harder to hide behind excuses. Within 48 hours, Karen faced consequences beyond public humiliation. Insurance companies reportedly began reviewing her previous claims. Her past settlements came under new scrutiny. People who had once believed they were alone began comparing their stories. A class action lawsuit was filed on behalf of those who claimed Karen had defrauded them over the years. Karen Matthews had entered the courtroom believing she could pull off one more con. Instead, she became the public face of what happens when manipulation meets preparation. Her name was now connected to fraud, fake medical emergencies, and one of the most humiliating courtroom exposures ever seen on daytime television. The most damaging part was not just that Karen lost the case. It was that she lost the method. The thing she had depended on for years, sympathy, no longer worked. After the footage, every future claim she made would be questioned. Every medical emergency tied to her name would face skepticism. Every past story would be examined through the lens of the performance the world had seen. That was the real punishment. Judge Judy had not just ordered Karen to pay Maria. She had taken away the weapon Karen had used against vulnerable people. And she had done it with evidence so clear that even Karen's anger could not erase it. The story of Karen Matthews and her fake medical emergency became one of the most satisfying courtroom takedowns ever captured on television, not because it was loud, but because it showed what happens when a long-running fraud finally runs into evidence strong enough to expose it completely. Karen had spent years believing she could control people through fear, guilt, and sympathy. She believed if she looked sick enough, sounded weak enough, and created enough panic, people would stop asking questions. She had used that strategy on workers, businesses, insurance companies, and anyone else who got too close to holding her accountable. But in Judge Judy's courtroom, that strategy finally failed. This was never just a case about three Susan in unpaid wages. For Maria Santos, that money mattered deeply. It represented honest work, long hours, and support for her disabled son. But the case became much bigger than a single unpaid bill. It became a case about manipulation. It became a case about people who use fake victimhood to escape responsibility. It became a case about every honest worker who has ever completed a job, asked to be paid, and then been attacked by someone trying to avoid payment. Karen Matthews had allegedly built her entire system on the backs of people who could not afford to fight back. She knew that independent workers often do not have the money for lawyers. She knew small business owners sometimes choose to walk away because legal action costs more than the unpaid invoice. She knew good people hesitate when someone claims they are having a medical crisis. She knew that sympathy could make honest people question themselves. And she used all of that. She turned medical emergencies into theater. She turned ordinary payment disputes into emotional traps. She turned compassion into a weapon. But her biggest mistake was assuming that the same act would work on Judge Judy. Judge Judy did not stumble into the truth by accident. She investigated, she prepared, she studied the pattern, she brought in medical support, she had the documents ready, she had the footage ready, and most importantly, she understood Karen's psychology well enough to let Karen expose herself. That was what made the takedown so powerful. Judge Judy did not need to scream. She did not need to argue. She did not need to chase Karen through excuses. She simply gave Karen enough space to perform the same routine she had allegedly used so many times before. Then she destroyed the performance with facts. Dr. Chen's examination removed the illusion of a heart attack. The normal vital signs removed Karen's claim of immediate medical distress. The parking garage footage removed any possibility that the episode had been spontaneous. That footage changed everything because it proved preparation. It showed Karen sitting in her car, rehearsing the chest clutching, the breathing, the collapse, and even timing herself with her phone. It showed that this was not panic. It was planning. And once planning was proven, Karen's entire defense collapsed. A real medical emergency does not need rehearsal. A real heart attack is not timed in a parking garage. A real victim does not suddenly become furious when a doctor walks in to help. Karen's reaction after being exposed told the courtroom everything her performance tried to hide. The fragile voice disappeared. The helpless body language vanished. The frightened expression turned into anger. The moment her act failed, the victim mask fell away, and the entitlement underneath became visible. That was why Judge Judy's verdict felt so satisfying. Maria did not win because people felt sorry for her. She won because she had proof. She had messages. She had photographs. She had records. She had a clear timeline. She had the calm dignity of someone telling the truth without needing to perform it. Karen, on the other hand, had accusations without evidence, emotion without credibility, and a medical emergency that vanished under examination. The contrast could not have been clearer. Maria represented honest work. Karen represented calculated deception. Maria wanted payment for labor she had completed. Karen wanted to avoid responsibility by turning herself into the victim. But in that courtroom, the truth finally had a stage. Judge Judy's decision to award Maria the $3,000 she was owed restored more than money. It restored dignity, and the additional $2,000 for emotional distress sent an even stronger message. You do not get to lie about an honest worker, stage a medical crisis, and then walk away as if nothing happened. That judgment mattered because it told every worker watching that their labor has value. It told every manipulator watching that performance cannot replace evidence. And it told every person who had ever been cheated by someone like Karen that accountability is still possible. But the consequences did not stop at the television judgment. By forwarding the evidence to the proper authorities, Judge Judy made sure Karen's alleged pattern could be examined beyond one courtroom appearance. Insurance companies could review past claims. Investigators could look into previous medical episodes. Former victims could come forward with their own stories. Suddenly, the separate incidents that Karen had used to protect herself were no longer separate. They were connected. And connection is dangerous for a fraudster. Karen's entire method depended on isolation. One worker walked away quietly. One business settled privately. One employer paid to avoid conflict. One church believed her story. One insurance claim passed without a broader review. Each event looked small when viewed alone, but together they formed a pattern. And once that pattern was visible, Karen could no longer hide behind coincidence. That is why the aftermath became so devastating for her. The public did not just see a woman lose a case. They saw a method being exposed. They saw how fake suffering could be used to manipulate decent people. They saw how someone could build an entire identity around being fragile while hurting people who were actually vulnerable. Maria's victory became powerful because she refused to disappear. She could have walked away like others before her. She could have accepted the loss. She could have decided that fighting Karen was too stressful, too expensive, or too risky. But she did not. She documented everything. She kept proof. She trusted the truth enough to bring it into the courtroom. And because she stood her ground, the entire pattern began to fall apart. That is one of the biggest lessons from this case. Truth matters, but documented truth matters even more. Photos matter. Mass matter. Payment records matter. Timelines matter. When someone lies with confidence, evidence is what cuts through the performance. Maria's records gave Judge Judy the foundation to challenge Karen's claims. Without them, Karen might have been able to create confusion again. She might have turned the case into a battle of emotions. She might have used the fake heart attack to shift attention away from the facts. But Maria came prepared, and preparation gave the truth power. Karen's downfall also became a warning to every scammer who believes they can manipulate their way out of consequences forever. In today's world, lies leave traces. Cameras record, messages remain, medical records can be checked. Social media can contradict claims. Patterns can be uncovered. Karen believed her performance would save her. Instead, it became the final proof against her. The chest clutching, the gasping, the dramatic collapse. All of it was meant to create sympathy. But once the parking garage footage appeared, those same actions looked like evidence of fraud. That is what made the exposure so complete. Karen wanted to control the room with fear. Judge Judy controlled it with facts. Karen wanted to stop the case with a fake emergency. Judge Judy turned the fake emergency into the center of the case. Karen wanted Maria to look dishonest. Judge Judy showed the courtroom who had really been dishonest. In the end, Karen Matthews did not lose because Judge Judy disliked her. She lost because the evidence was stronger than the act. She lost because her claims did not match the records. She lost because her pattern was too clear. She lost because her performance was caught before it ever reached the bench. She lost because the truth finally had witnesses. And Maria Santos walked out with more than a judgment. She walked out with her dignity restored. She walked out knowing that her work had been recognized, her evidence had been believed, and her refusal to stay silent had protected not only herself but possibly other people who might have been targeted later. That is what real justice looks like. Not revenge, not cruelty, not chaos. Justice is when an honest person is heard. Justice is when lies are exposed. Justice is when someone who has used power, fear, or manipulation against vulnerable people finally faces consequences. Judge Judy proved once again why her courtroom became famous for cutting through excuses. She did not let Karen's drama control the case. She did not let emotion replace evidence. She did not allow a rehearsed medical scene to erase 2 years of honest work. She stayed focused. She stayed prepared, and when the truth appeared, she let it speak louder than Karen ever could. Karen Matthews entered that courtroom believing she had one more performance left. She believed she could fool the judge, shame Maria, escape payment, and walk away as the victim again. Instead, she became the warning that manipulation eventually runs out of places to hide. The warning that fake sympathy cannot protect you forever. The warning that when you turn other people's kindness into a weapon, one day the truth will turn that weapon back on you. And that is why this case stayed with viewers. Because everyone watching understood the satisfaction of seeing an honest worker finally win against someone who thought rules did not apply to her. Everyone understood the relief of watching a liar get exposed not through shouting, but through preparation, patience, and undeniable proof. Maria Santos got her money, Karen Matthews got exposed, and Judge Judy delivered one of the clearest reminders that in a courtroom, performance may get attention, but evidence wins the case. Sometimes justice is not dramatic because someone falls apart. Sometimes justice is satisfying because the performance finally ends. And in Karen Matthews' case, the moment her fake heart attack failed was the moment the truth finally stood up.